Welcome to China Tech Talk, a weekly podcast about what's happening on the ground in China's tech and startup ecosystem. I'm John Artman, editor-in-chief of TechNode.
And I'm Matthew Brennan. I'm founder at ChinaChannel.co.
This week we're talking a little bit about bike sharing. So this is one of those trends that has been the talk of the town for quite some time here in China. And it's only just recently that larger media organizations are picking up on it and talking more about it. So we thought that, for our first episode, that this might be a good chance to start talking a little bit about bike sharing. And so for this episode, we're going to be mostly focusing on some of the basics, some basic questions about bike sharing or bike rental, as I like to call it. And then later on, in later episodes, we're going to be focusing on other aspects, drilling down a little bit into some of the nuts and bolts of bike sharing. But for this first episode, in terms of length and in terms of quality, want to keep it as focused as possible. So we're going to be looking at some few basic questions. So
Right.
So Matthew, let's just start at the beginning. What is bike sharing?
Yeah, exactly. What is bike sharing? For people who lived in China, they're going to be like, duh. Yeah, I mean, like, this thing's in my face every day, right? So, of course, everyone here knows what it is. And if anyone's listening from outside China and you're in a major urban area, if you're in the UK, if you're in the States, then maybe, you've got something that's going to, hopefully, it might be hitting you soon, and that's going to be bike sharing. And it's coming from here in China. So bike sharing, it's been around for a long time. It's nothing new, this concept. But it's, I guess, the traditional form of bike sharing with docking stations is something, usually government-sponsored, local government programs. And that's been around for a while. Hangzhou in China has a particularly good program for that stuff. I think we both experienced that, haven't we, John? The one in Hangzhou.
Yeah.
And but what we're talking about here is a more sort of startup tech orientated version, which cropped up, started out a little while back, a year or two back in China, where now we're using, from a user perspective, the difference is that it's based around an app or in China a mini program. And the experience here is different because two things. One is the app. You're paying for an app on your phone, and you can leave the bike anywhere you want. So there's no stations to dock them as such.
And that's the thing. So in bike sharing programs, government-sponsored bike sharing programs across the world, one of the main features was that it was docked, and it's very true in Hangzhou. I know that Melbourne in Australia, they have a similar program as well. New York City, they've tried it out too. And as you say, the one of the biggest differentiators is that there is no dock for these new bike sharing, and it's interesting because yes, of course, I mean it is dockless, and so that you can conceivably park them anywhere that you want. But it's funny because in China this is actually becoming more and more of a city management issue where governments are beginning to step in and mandate that people actually park in certain areas. And we can talk a little bit about that later or perhaps in a different episode. But I do want to point out that on the one hand, yes, they are dockless for the time being. Right now, more and more we are seeing that actually there are designated parking areas for these bikes. But also one of the things that I want to talk about as well is, and I mentioned this in the beginning, most people refer to this phenomenon as bike sharing.
Yes.
Actually, I think that is a misnomer. It's not really sharing. I mean, in the sense that it's a shared resource. Yes, that is sharing. But you have to think the sharing economy. This phrase came about with companies like TaskRabbit. companies like Lyft and later versions of Uber, with certain features within inside the DD application where you share someone else's car. So someone is using their own car to pick you up and take you somewhere. So that's still kind of sharing in a sense. But if we're saying that bikes, these new companies are part of the shared resource economy, well, that's true of so much. I mean, that's true of a table at a restaurant. That's true of a seat on a public bus. That's true of a parking space on the side of the road. And you can kind of see where I'm going with this. It's not really sharing, because these are bikes that a company owns that they are then, renting out to you for a certain price for a certain time. And so for me, I like to call them bike rentals. And actually, as editorial policy on TechNode.com, we call it bike rental. We don't call it bike sharing. Because actually bike rental is a much more accurate way of describing what the relationship is between the bike and the user.
When you sit there and describe it like that, the logic is undeniable. The problem is it's picked up this phrase, right? So that is how the media, that is how people are describing it under this phrase, bike sharing. That's how I often speak to people about it, using that phrase. But when you dive down into it, and I think you're totally right. It is bike rental. Why are we talking about this? I think perhaps just to give a little bit of a backstory. Again, if you're in China, you'll know straight away why we're talking about this. But if you're not in China, you might be, okay, why are they talking about this? It's a trend here that is really transforming the streets of China. The streets of major cities in China. It's go on Google if you haven't seen any pictures of this. Go on Google and type in Mobike or OFO or China bike sharing, and you're going to see some crazy pictures.
There's one that's been circulating. I think you posted it as well. Of the all the Mobikes in Guangzhou, like all stacked up underneath. It looked like a highway overpass or something.
Yeah. That was the craziest one I've seen so far.
Saw a video yesterday actually of someone inside an OFO warehouse where it's just 1,000 square feet or 2,000 square feet, more than that. I'm horrible with size, but just this huge space.
I mean, that's China. The scale of the market here is almost unimaginable if you're coming from Europe or the States from internet stuff. It's multiple times. I mean, to anything else. And bike sharing, so the addressable market is almost everyone in China. That's a lot of people, and that's a lot of bikes. And,
exactly.
So these guys, when you look at their factories or their storage facilities, you almost need aerial photography to get a sense of what's going on.
And that's the amazing thing I think about this trend is that you and I have talked about this off air previously, and I wrote a quick piece kind of drawing similar conclusions as well. But it's really interesting to see how so number one, the rate of adoption in China is absolutely amazing. To see how quickly people are picking up on new technologies, new ways of interacting with the world, interacting with each other, and new ways of consuming and behaving it's all being shaped by technology, and so people are changing their habits very, very quickly. And bike sharing is one of those things where you see that the internet and mobile data and smartphones and mobile payments, it's almost bringing us back to something that was already a powerful force in China, in this case bikes. I think everyone knows that, back in the 70s and 80s, China was a country of bikes with very, very few cars. The roads were all built for bikes. Everyone had a bike. And so at that time, I mean, to have a car was, this huge status symbol. Even the subway system in Beijing, that wasn't even built until the 70s, and it's a lot less than much smaller than it is right now. And so what we're seeing is, because of the internet, mobile data, mobile payments, China is kind of going back in time, in a sense, going back to a time where more people actually rode bikes, because now it's actually convenient. Now it actually kind of makes sense, because people aren't riding bikes from point A to point B. What they're doing is they're taking a subway from point A to point B, and then point C is their final destination, is still 1 or 2 kilometers away. So, scan a QR code, hop on a bike, get there in, half the time that it would have taken you just by walking. And
bike sharing is just at the epicenter of so many trends here. It's like the eye of the storm, almost. It's like it's QR codes, it's sharing economy, it's mobile payments. Like you say, it's got this sort of cultural reference from bikes, which China from decades back has been associated with bikes. It links into pollution. It links into sharing economy. It links into China's health problems. And you're right, it's all about the last mile. In fact, I think that's Mobike's catchphrase or the tagline. It's like solving the last mile problem, something like that, something along those lines. It's adding to the already existing transport infrastructure, and the addressable market really is everyone. It's not, even if you have a car, you could still be using bike sharing on a daily basis. It would still make sense. These are about short distances, and it's a great example of how, as you just said, John, China's on fast forward. People change their habits so fast here. And we're seeing this transformation now take place before our eyes. And it's beautiful, I think. It's beautiful what's happening, and it's a great trend. It's solving a lot of problems, and it's, at its core, improving the efficiency of the economy. People are able to get from A to B faster because of this, and that is likely having, when you think about it on a very high-level economics, broad scale here, that is great for the economy, and it's great for the efficiency of China. You're just able to get things done faster here, right?
Exactly.
It's on fast forward a little bit more now.
Exactly. And there are some questions, and some moral questions perhaps, about the value or the desirability of living on fast forward. But we can probably talk about that later, if at all, because that's a whole episode in and of itself. So far we've mentioned quite a few names.
Yes.
And so, looking at the market right now, the two big players are OFO and Mobike. So OFO got started in 2014. They were actually there on college campuses, and so their main market, their business thesis was that they were going to provide transportation solutions for college students on campus. And it was actually at the time it was actually bike sharing, because they had this program where you could donate your bike to OFO. And then you would have a lifetime or extended periods of time where you could use OFO for free. And so that started in 2014. Mobike, which is the other big one, they actually started in 2015. So a very different background, where one of the co-founders is actually from Uber China, and so after Uber and Didi merged, he went on to found Mobike with his co-founder, who is actually her background is journalism, and so she was doing automotive journalism for quite some time, and then along with ride hailing and ride sharing, they both saw this opportunity to create a shared transportation solution in bikes. And so it's interesting, because actually you can kind of see in some ways how their background is also changing, is also influencing their market strategy as well. Whereas Mobike, they came in with technology on board. The bikes were built to last. They were very sturdy, maybe a bit too heavy, but they were very sturdy, almost impossible to break. And they came with GPS and GSM cards on board. Whereas OFO, and even to this day, they're all manual combinations, manual locks. So Mobike, you scan a QR code and it will unlock itself. OFO, you have to scan the QR code and then it will tell you what the combination is. And this it raises a few operational problems for OFO.
Yes,
but that's a little bit of background with the big two. Of course, there's also Blue Gogo, which actually has one of their investors is the same VC firm as OFO. That's Gen Fund, and so OFO, Yong'an, and a few other ones. I mean, there's a lot of small ones.
Oh, there's a lot. Yeah, there's like a whole rainbow of small competitors out there in terms of the colors. Because, the color of these bike schemes is the thing that people notice first, I guess. So they all have like their distinctive color. For OFO, that's yellow. For Mobike, that's orange. But, you have other guys in there and you can tell them straight away on the streets because they're different colors. And yeah, this market's getting flooded with competitors. It has been for some time now. In fact, I wrote a report about it in November last year, and at that time, I remember very distinctly the reason I wanted to write that report is because I discovered that there were all these small competitors popping up, and I didn't know that at the time. And I thought, oh wow, this is really, really cool. And I did all this bunch of research about them and find out all their WeChat official accounts and put that in the report. And when we put that out, that was the main thing that made people, I think, share that report was, oh wow, look, there's other ones. I've never seen these. And at the time, that was so fresh and new. And this is November, so we're in, half a year away, I guess, from that now, and almost every number and everything I put in that report is irrelevant now. It's in half a year, the whole thing has just moved on so fast and changed so much that I think the only things that would be useful from that report would be the official accounts for the different competitors in there. Every number in there is completely wrong now. But yeah, that was the first time that I saw that, and now everybody in China knows that, and there's just competitors everywhere. And most cities have their sort of local upstart in this area that's also trying to take some market share. So this is pretty common, actually, in China. When something gets hot, a lot of people will flood into the market. So nothing new there. But what is new is just how visible it is in your face when you get out your apartment here and you get onto the street. These bikes are literally everywhere. You can't ignore it. Got echoes of the Didi and Uber ride-sharing war that happened a couple of years back in China. That war's over. Now we basically have a monopoly in place where Didi Dache has a monopoly in this market almost. I mean, there are other competitors, but there was a that's a bit of a exaggeration, but they're definitely having a very, very strong position in that market now. And there was a period where they were fighting with Uber here in China, and there was a crazy period where they were subsidizing these rides like crazy and throwing money at this, and people were getting free taxi rides everywhere, and the drivers were getting subsidized, and it was mental what was happening. But it wasn't so visible, it wasn't so in your face. If you weren't using those apps, you there's nothing visibly changing on the streets for you to see that this was happening. Whereas for here, the streets, China, your daily life, even if you're not a techie person, even if you're not you're never going to use these bike sharing programs, they are affecting your life. They're affecting everybody.
Exactly. Yeah, and so, a personal story real quick. I ride an electric bike. I've been riding an electric bike for years now. And one of the things that I've noticed is that in China, the most dangerous person isn't necessarily the crazy driver. There aren't too many crazy drivers here. Mostly because the traffic is just too bad. It's just a bit too difficult to be crazy. But the most dangerous driver is going to be the one that has less experience and has less confidence as well. And so this is actually becoming a bit of a problem for me and other drivers, people who are a bit more experienced on the road, is that you're getting more and more inexperienced bike riders onto the roads. And so that's the thing. Bikes are a large part of Chinese history, but over the decades, especially in Beijing, because Beijing is not really built for either you have a car or you have an electric bike. There are people that have bikes, but they're not that many for various reasons. And so we're getting a lot more people who maybe they haven't ridden a bike very often. Maybe they're not used to being on the road. Maybe it's been a while since they've ridden a bike on the streets. And so it actually does get to be a bit dangerous at times. And so there's a bit of a readjustment, I think, kind of going on across the board, but in particular when it comes to driving and to just the number of actual bikes on the road has increased by
Yes.
so much, in part because we're seeing a lot more electric bikes, in part because of delivery. Delivery is becoming more and more a part of the Chinese economy, and so you have more and more delivery drivers. And then, of course, with these bikes, more and more people are riding bikes now because they are freely available. And the great thing is you don't have to worry about if it breaks, how do you fix it? You don't have to worry about it getting stolen because ultimately it's not yours. And so just in general, it's seeing a lot of use.
Yeah, it's not perfect by any means. There's a lot of issues that need to be ironed out, and I think they are being ironed out. And what you just described is one of them. People parking their bikes in random places is another. Vandalism of the bikes is a very visible problem. I don't think it's as big a problem as people make it out to be, but it is a problem, and that needs to be sorted out somehow. You have for the OFO system, because of its security loopholes in there, the way they're doing it is actually a very low-tech solution that they're using. It seems like, they're using an app, and so it's like very high-tech. It's not. OFO's system is very low-tech. As you described earlier, John, you make the payment on your mobile phone, but all they really give you is a code to open a manual lock on the bike. And so there are a large proportion of bikes. I read a survey about a week ago where they went on the streets and checked like about 1,000 bikes, and they worked out that 15% of OFO bikes were basically unlocked. Yeah, people hadn't bothered to once they'd finished, relock the bike, and so that leads to issues where you have children using these bikes. I've seen a lot of that. I think that's quite unsafe, actually. And so, there are all these issues coming up that do need to be addressed. Broadly speaking, I do think that the government is really behind this. If they weren't, then we would have seen much stronger actions taking place than what we've seen right now. And they're behind this because of many of the reasons that we talked about before. It adds efficiency to the economy. It's tech innovation. It addresses to some degree the health issue that will, this looming time bomb of that China has in terms of healthcare. And so all these factors combined, traffic situation, congestion, pollution. These are the issues that the government worries about, and they're really struggling with right now. Pollution especially, I think, is something that gets a lot of press. in China and outside China, and is up their priority list. And anything that can help alleviate that kind of issue is something they're definitely going to support 100%. And so bike sharing does that for them.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting in terms of policy. Again, drawing parallels between Didi, Kuaidi, Uber. In terms of policy, just how I think the government is going to be a little bit more open about these bike rental companies. As you mentioned, I mean, like Didi has a virtual monopoly on the ride-hailing market. There are some smaller companies, companies that have a smaller market share, but they're a bit more niche, and so they focus on higher value services, such as renting a car, or renting a driver plus a car for an entire day, and things like that.
Yeah.
Whereas Didi, I mean, a lot of Didi is cab hailing, but then also private car hailing. So they have a few different tiers for that. But at the end of the day, I mean, if you look at Didi's market share, 94.6% of the market by the latest estimates. So again, it is a virtual monopoly,
yes,
in part because the government. That's kind of how the government wants it, perhaps as a utility, but I think more because it's easier to regulate and it's easier to actually control. And so if the market starts to go a little bit crazy, well then who to point to, who to talk to,
yes,
to kind of get things back under control. And also if there is a monopoly, it's much less likely that there will be problems within this specific market. Whereas with bike rental, it's much more open. It is, I think, strategic in a sense where it solves problems for people that the government cannot, which is why I think one of the reasons that they do support it. But also in terms of regulation, I mean, it's not as key. I think that we will see the government. I mean, and we already are seeing local governments get more serious about it. Designated parking areas, enforcing rules about behavior, even at some points. Arresting people or fining people for misusing or abusing bikes, trying to steal them, trying to commandeer them for their own private use. So in that sense, the government is serious. But at the end of the day, the bikes themselves and bike rental, it's not as strategic transportation infrastructure, and so I think they are going to be a much more open about how they let this develop, and at the end of the day, who they kind of quote unquote let win, because the government is definitely they're very interested in who's going to win in certain markets, and what their relationship is going to be with the government.
Yeah, for sure. My understanding is that a duopoly is quite a good result. Chinese government likes that kind of market, and if you look at state-owned enterprises in telecom area, for example, that's what they set up, right? They have China Mobile, they have China Unicom. Those guys hate each other, and they both are the guys who have the big market shares. There's
right.
some other small players in there, but it's basically those two guys fighting it out. And that's very nice because you have some competition in there between those guys, but it's not too many people to contact if you need to control the industry somehow. You've got two guys that you need to call up if you need to suddenly do something.
Exactly, and also at the same time, these companies, they know which side of the bread is buttered, and so they're going to cultivate and manage the relationship with the regulators and with the government much better, perhaps, because they are actually interested in doing so.
Let's leave it to part two. We've covered a lot. I think we've got a lot of the basics, and in part two we'll go over. We deliberately left talking about the business model to part two because I think that's really the juicy part. I know that's the part that everybody has questions about and everyone is suspicious about. Everyone has their own theory, actually, is what I've worked out. Everyone thinks that they've worked it out. They know how this is what they're doing. there's many ways that they could be monetizing on this, or they are, and there's a couple of things going on that are very interesting.
We're going to wrap it up right about there. Of course, we will be talking a little bit more about bike rental and bike sharing later on down the road. So China Tech Talk is a TechNode China Channel co-production. And if you enjoyed this episode and would like to support us, we would really appreciate a share on social media or a review on iTunes or wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. Welcome to China Tech Talk, a weekly podcast about what's happening on the ground in China's tech and startup ecosystem. I'm John Artman, editor-in-chief of TechNode. That's your cue.
And I'm Matthew Brennan, and the sound cut out just as you finished.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, missed my cue there.
Let's just do it again. How about that?
Sure.
Okay.